What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel, and we are continuing with the recap tier lists for 2024. We've already gone through every event of the year, ranking the best cards of the year, and now I'm going to be moving on to the best fights of the year. This was the topic that was requested. I put up a poll on my community page for you guys to vote on which video I should do. I had fighter of the year, knockout of the year, fight of the year, and you guys voted for fight of the year. So I'm going to be discussing some of the best scraps of 2024. There were some absolute wars, there were some fun fights, there were some shit fights, which I'm not going to be talking about today. You know, normally I try and cover like the best and the worst, but just because I do want to give a shout out to like all of the good fights, and I don't really care to spend time on the terrible ones, I'm only going to be talking about fights that I consider to be in the top 30, 35 of the year. Now, some of these, as you can see, there's the lower tier, which is cut short / one-sided. So some of those fights could have been objectively very fun, but it didn't quite have that like extra kind of bit of the back and forth action or the prolonged fight. Like, it might have been a great fight for a round, but it finished right after that. So yeah, I'll justify all my selections for the most part. If you disagree, I'm more than welcome to hear your comments. I am going to be doing a 32 fight bracket for the fight of the year after this video comes out, so you guys can vote on what you think was the fight of the year. But anyway, enough yap. Let's get into the video, and we're going to start off in the top tier. Starting off with Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. I'm chucking this in the top 5. I do think this is a top 5 fight of 2024 in my opinion. Now, was it the most back and forth barn burner striking, just throwing hands for 15 straight or 25 straight minutes? No, but the competitiveness of it and the title fight aspect did kind of elevate it a bit. And I will say, I think the fact that Dustin was such a big underdog that no one really expected him to do well, and when he started doing well, I think it made his moments bigger than they were. I think a lot of you can probably agree. But the fight was good. Look, there were moments like round 1, not a lot happened. Islam just had a lot of ground control. But like especially rounds 3, 4, and 5, the later half of that fight really picked up. Islam got cut open with the elbow. Dustin started landing his combination, started walking forward, screaming in the face of Islam, and the fight really picked up, ultimately leading to a pretty competitive, probably 3-1. Some people had it 2-2 on rewatch. I definitely had it 3-1 to Islam, but then before getting the submission in the 5th round to eliminate all doubt. Just a great fight, a great title fight, and I also think it saved that card as well, which probably made it even better. Because like there's been other fights where they're on the same card, like on 306, there were a bunch of amazing fights, but Ribovics Zellhuber was by far the best fight of the card, so everyone kind of just forgot about everything else. 302 was the exact opposite. There was nothing to remember, so this fight was like, oh my god, this was amazing, because it saved the card. But anyway, let's move on though to another fight. Next up, I swear to God, wallahi, this is not recency bias. I don't know why I said wallahi. Swanson, Billy Quarintillo was a fucking sick fight. I thought this was like top 10 fights of the year in my... Maybe I'm bugging. Maybe it's just outside the top 10 or something, but I thought this was a sick fight. Maybe I need to go back and rewatch it and chill, but on stream when I was watching this, I was like, what the fuck? These guys just swinging the whole time, and then it ends with a crazy KO. And it's good though, because if the KO had been in like the second, it would have been good, but I would have had it a little bit lower down, just because you need like a full kind of at least 2 rounds of action for it, unless it's just like a minute, unless it's like a round of just barn burner, nothing but fucking rocking and like killing each other, then it does need to be a bit of a longer fight. And this one had 2 rounds of it, and then we had a crazy KO. So this fight was sick, in my opinion. Maybe you guys have a lower down, but just based off recency bias, because I remember it probably more than I remember some other fights, this was one of my favourite fights of the year. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we got Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. I think this fight was incredible, and it was not even the best fight on the card of UFC 305 on the main card, which is crazy, because I'll talk about that other fight in a bit. But this fight was nuts. I thought maybe, again, I need to go back and rewatch it, and maybe there were like longer periods of inactivity, but I don't remember a part of this fight where I felt bored watching it, or like, they're really not doing much, are they? Like, can they pick up the pace? Like, this was pretty much non-stop action, or at least like back and forth. Dricus had success in the grappling. Izzy started to kind of tune him up on the feet, and that sequence in the 4th round with the finish was crazy as well. It wasn't like immediately into the 4th either, so we got a good 3.5 rounds of action before the finish ended up coming. But yeah, Izzy had moments turning the tide on the feet. Dricus even rocked Izzy leading to the finish. This was back and forth. This was high level stuff, and it proved once again that Dricus is going to retard max his way to a middleweight title legacy. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, bit of an underrated one, still a great scrap, was Stephen Nguyen versus Jano Errens. And this fight was actually sick. Go back and rewatch it if you haven't. It was one of those Apex cards. It was on the prelims. I'm pretty sure you probably would have missed it. But it was a good fight. Definitely worth going back and rewatching. Errens was kind of tuning him up the whole time, but then Nguyen went back to his corner, came out in the third round knowing he needed to finish, went for it, chucked himself out there, and then ended up getting dropped and beaten up on in the third, and then ended up losing a decision. But this was a fun fight. It was mostly Errens the whole way through winning, but there were moments when Nguyen just had moments of aggression trying to get himself back in the fight. So it was an enjoyable watch for sure. So go watch this one if you haven't already. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we got Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira. This ended up winning fight of the night at UFC 309. I honestly don't think it was actually the best fight on the card. It was fun. It was enjoyable to watch Oliveira win. But I think the main part of it was just like Oliveira beat up on him for 4 rounds, and then Chandler did his little thing where he tries to have a moment in each fight so that he can do his little coping and think he's still good. Because he just has that one moment. It's like, see guys, I had a back and forth, and then he goes on a fucking... he acts like it was a competitive fight, bro. Goes out there, does the slamming in the 5th round, and then goes on the mic and acts like he's just fucking dominated him 50-45. Like, I don't know what he was doing, but the fight was enjoyable, but there were a lot of moments where the first round was dead. Like, it was just they held themselves in one position the whole time. There were moments of prolonged control for Oliveira. It was an enjoyable watch, but not like a crazy scrap, in my opinion. Anyway, let's move on though, back to the top of the tier list. Next up, another extremely underrated fight, Billy Goff versus Trey Waters. This is in my top 5 fights of the year. Now, maybe that's an underrated or an unpopular opinion. I'm fucking trying to process my brain right now. I don't think many people really remember this fight. It was on the prelims of the UFC St. Louis card, headlined by Derek Lewis and Rodrigo Nascimento. This fight was sick. Now, the 3rd round slowed down a bit, very opposite to a lot of fights on this tier list, which had a pretty decent first 2 and then a crazy third. This had a crazy first 2 and then a decent 3rd round. But these guys just swung. It was sick to watch because Trey Waters was just trying to range max the whole time. It was very similar to like a style of Zellhuber versus Ribovics, but just slightly less action, I would say. But it was nuts. Billy Goff was going back and forth. He got kneed on the ground once, or maybe he kneed him on the ground. I know he got kneed on the ground. He was just pushing forward, trying to get past the range, kind of just forcing himself in, running in, just accepting punishment. It was a sick watch. So if you haven't watched this already, go back and rewatch it. Maybe I'm tripping, but I really enjoyed this fight live. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we had Sidey versus Ramon Taveras. This was a rematch from their initial fight on Contender Series, which ended in an early stoppage. But this fight was sick. Did not disappoint, did not underwhelm. This was nuts. Like, first 2 rounds of this, maybe it was the first 3 or the 2nd and 3rd, but I think the first round was like relatively pedestrian. It was good, but it was a fun round, but not like crazy. And then second round, there might have been a knockdown in the first, but second round, Taveras dropped Sidey bad, bust his nose open, he fractured his nose or broke his nose or whatever. Sidey's nose was bleeding like a motherfucker because he had blonde hair in this fight, and so you could see like his whole head was just fucking bleached. Bleached blonde hair just turned red. It looked fucking like he's been going down on his missus during her time of the month, you know? It's not relatable at all. But But then, yeah, Sidey comes on strong and just starts fucking beating up Taveras for like the back half of the second round. And Taveras ended up winning a decision. No people on MMA decisions, none of the like media members scored it for him, which was interesting. I watched it. I thought it was pretty competitive, but it was just sick to watch like Sidey come back from adversity. Taveras was like had that power advantage, but he was kind of getting backed up too much, not throwing enough output, which is something that also cost him in his recent fight with Davey Grant. But still, this fight was nuts, back and forth, lots of blood, and it was an enjoyable watch as well on the Canada card, which didn't have a lot to offer either. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, David Onama vs. Roberto Romero. This was a fight on UFC 309, which I thought was actually the best fight of the card over Oliveira and Chandler, but this was a sick fight. Romero came in plus 800 as an underdog, and then he dropped Onama bad in the first, ended up getting drops late in the first two, and then for the remainder of the fight, you could tell Onama had the cardio advantage because Romero was taking, it was just like a 4-day notice fight, randomly got put together on fight week, like after I made my fucking prediction video, I'm pretty sure. And so yeah, it was late notice, and then Romero just comes in plus 800 and is doing competitive. He lost 30-27, but it was like an enjoyable 30-27 where it's like Romero was pushing a pace the whole time, trying to keep himself in the fight, but you could just tell Onama was a bit too crisp. But yeah, very enjoyable fight to watch. Go back and watch this if you haven't already. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. This was a good scrap. This was a very enjoyable fight to watch. The spinning wheel kick at the end of round 1 was pretty crazy. I wouldn't say it was like, maybe I need to rewatch it from memory. It wasn't like that crazy back and forth. It was like they both threw a lot, but it never felt like they were just standing in the pocket scrapping. Maybe I'm bugging. Maybe I need to go back and rewatch it. It was a very fun fight, but maybe some people would have it higher up on their list. I just don't remember it very clearly, and I've got like 35 fucking fights on this list. I haven't gone back and rewatched all of them. I'm sorry. I've been watching half of them in like 2 times speed just so I can like try and get through them all. But yeah, Whittaker Costa was a very good fight. Somehow didn't win fight of the night. Fucking Dern versus Lemos. I'm not even putting that on this fucking. I'm not putting women's MMA on this list. I don't care. They're graded on a curve. Like they're not the same. It's like when your subjects scale down in school, like with what happened with me, because I did bot subjects, so I didn't have to study and could focus on the channel. It's like that. Like you do a really easy subject, it ends up becoming less relevant. Like they give you less points for it. It's the same with fucking women's MMA, bro. Like you can be considered good in women's standards, but it's like, come on, it's not that good. Anyway, Whittaker Costa should have won fight of the night for 298, but still very good fight. Let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we had Lerone Murphy-Edson Barboza. This was an enjoyable fight. It was tough to watch because I was rooting for Barboza, but Murphy tuned him up. The sheer output from Murphy, landed like 220 strikes, did kind of make it entertaining. Like if someone's landing that much, it's going to be fun, but it wasn't real back and forth, but still, it was a good fight to watch. Anyway, let's move on though to the next one. Miktabek Orolbai versus Mateusz Rabecki. This fight was sick, and I think everyone agrees this should be on your top 5 list of 2024. The first 2 rounds were very good. They were enjoyable. We saw Rabecki bust open Orolbai's eye and fucking swell up his eye in the first round, and then Orolbai actually came back and won the second when he legitimately, I don't think, could see out of his eye. And then the third round is like top 3 rounds of the year, and in any other fucking year it's probably round of the year, except like Ribovics Zellhuber existed and Holloway Gaethje round 5. But the round was sick. Rabecki comes out there, drops him bad. You're like, it's done. This should be done, but it's not. Beats the fuck out of Orolbai for like a minute straight. Orolbai ends up. Then Rabecki takes him down. Orolbai cannot fucking see a thing. Rabecki then somehow gets reversed. Orolbai ends up on top, starts pushing a pace on him at the end of the fucking round. Somehow ends up being a split, even though it was clear 2-1 Rabecki. But yeah, this fight was fucking sick. So I don't even need to tell you guys to go back and rewatch it. You probably have rewatched it 10 times already if you're a fight fan. But yeah, nuts fight from Mammoth Man and receding hairline Polish guy. Fucking Sean Shirk reincarnated. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we had Silva versus Drew Dober. Now this fight was very enjoyable to watch. Again, it ended up getting stopped to a cut, which probably did rob it of maybe even moving up a few placements on the list, but I enjoyed this a lot. Now maybe I'm a bit biased because I just wanted Silva to win. I picked him to win here on short notice, upper weight class, but this fight was sick. Gene was landing fucking spinning elbows, rocking Dober at the end of the round. There were moments of like not craziness, but for the most part this was a high output fun fight where even Silva was getting cracked at moments. You're like, oh, hang on, you gotta chill, because he started talking to his corner and stuff. This was an enjoyable fight. The spinning elbows at the end of the round that rocked him, the big shots, like it was just a fun fight to watch. Maybe I should have a little bit lower, but I'm biased for Gene Silva. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, Joshua Van versus Edgar Chairez. This fight was sick. This was on 306 in the Sphere, and this was buried on the fucking prelims, and it got forgotten because of how good Ribovics Zellhuber was. But this was, in my opinion, one of the best fights of the year, and round 2 is also got a fucking nomination for top 5 rounds of the year as well, in my opinion, because this shit was sick. The Van started just beating him up, was like, had him almost finished with body shots, headshots, hurt him hurt. Not Charles Johnson, that's who beat Van before that, CGI. But Chairez grabs the cage and then throws a fucking spinning back fist and rocks Van bad. Van shoots, gets him down. The first and third were good. Like the first round, Van got dropped. It was pretty fun. Third round was a little bit less. Van kind of did a bit more grappling, dropped to a fucking leg lock for whatever reason. But overall, round 2 made this fight incredible to watch. The back and forth was crazy. And it's always like when someone is almost finished and doesn't end up getting finished, it adds something to the fight, you know? Anyway, let's move on though down the tier list. Next up, we had Mariscal versus Morgan Charriere. This fight was sick. This was on the Allen vs Curtis card. Ended up winning fight of the night, even though I actually think the main event was better. But this fight was still sick. Third round, not as much, but the first 2 rounds were very fun. Maybe I'm tripping. Maybe I'm just forgetting what round was what. But I remember the first 2 rounds being crazy. Both guys landing good shots. Both guys having their moments. It wasn't like a crazy rock and sock 'em, but it was highly technical. Both like mixing in the grappling, mixing in the striking, and it was just enjoyable. Third round, I don't remember being as fun. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, this fight was still a very enjoyable fight to watch. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, Jiri Prohaska versus Alexander Rakic. This fight was very fun. Again, I'm just putting it in the bottom tier because I've set the grounds for either too short or one-sided. This was too short. We needed more of this. We needed Rakic to survive the second and it go into the third. That would have elevated this fight a lot. But it was like Rakic just kind of teeing off on Jiri, and then the second round's where it picked up and ended within about 2 minutes of Jiri getting momentum because, like Storm, you know, Jiri just fucking starts rolling downhill like a snowball and you just can't get momentum back once he's got it, is what it seems like. But still, very sick fight to watch. Let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, I do not need to explain this one. It's Esteban Ribovics versus Daniel Zellhuber. This fight, in my opinion, I'm going to just say fight of the year. Like, I'm okay with giving this fight of the year. I didn't want to order them because I actually will do the MMA Awards video as well once I've kind of done the individual recaps, which is why I haven't really been, like, naming the number one. Like, I've just been doing tiers of, like, where they place. But this, in my opinion, is pretty, like, fucking got a strong argument for number one. The first 2 rounds of this were already probably, like, if you just ended it after 2, if you just made the third round like the second and just ended it at that, it's just probably still on, like top, like, 10 tier, honestly. Maybe, like, top 15, alright? It was still an incredible fight, still just back and forth action, highly technical, highly competitive. And then the third round was the best round I've fucking seen live apart from, like, Jiri Glover round 5. To be honest, in my opinion. Just maybe this is bias. You guys are going to probably drop some fucking rounds from 2013 when I was 6 years of age. I didn't watch that. Sorry, buddy. I'm not 50. But anyway, no, round 3 of this fight. I checked the stats for this. These two combined threw 306 strikes in 5 minutes. That's 300 seconds. I'm going to do the fucking... Actually, I'll have you guys know. That's more than a strike a second. Well, that's basically averaging 1 strike per second thrown. Absolutely nuts. Ribovics got knocked down early. Zellhuber kept fucking poking him in the eye, Chris Weidman style. Then Ribovics comes back, rocks Zellhuber bad, tees off on him for about a minute straight. Zellhuber starts throwing back, and then towards the back, minute and a half, these guys were just trading. Third round did not slow down the fucking output at all. Ribovics came out throwing fucking head kicks like 5 seconds into the round. This shit was nuts. Even if you're not going to go back and rewatch the whole fight, which you should, go back and rewatch just round 3 if that's what you need to do, because this shit was absolutely nuts. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Stop, Alex Portan Pereira versus Khalil Rountree Jr. This fight was sick. First 2 rounds were like good. They were interesting. They were competitive which is what made them interesting because Khalil was doing better than we expected. Round 1, not a heap of craziness happened. It was just like a kind of outputty, not crazy power being landed. Second round, Pereira got dropped and we're like, hang on a second, what's going on here? Third round starts to turn the tide, starts landing his shots. Fourth round was when this picked up to become one of the fights of the year, when Pereira started teeing off on him. Khalil's chin was just taking him and then ended up... There was about a fucking 4 minute... It was about 4 minutes straight of just Pereira teeing off on Khalil Rountree's fucking skull and just brutalizing him. And then ends with a nasty body shot combination finish. So yeah, sick fight between the two of them. But it wasn't quite the same like pillar to post level barn burner as some other fights higher up on the list. Anyway, still great to watch. Let's move on though to the next fight. Next we had Jim Miller vs Bobby Green. I'm not calling him king, but this fight was sick. It was competitive for the first round, and then Bobby Green sort of took over, started teeing off on Jim Miller. And the third round of this fight, some of the numbers getting put up, I think he landed like 170 strikes. crazy numbers being put up from Bobby Green. This fight was fun as hell to watch. He was just throwing constant output, talking to Jim Miller. And yeah, it was just a really fun fight to watch. Anyway, let's move on. Ibo Aslan versus Anton Turkalj. I don't like Ibo Aslan, mostly just because he's fucking the Turkish fans that act like their country is represented by one unranked light heavyweight is kind of crazy. Like, just spamming Turkish fights. Like, your country's had no success in the sport. Plus, this dude's got gyno, so fuck him. But I will say, he's one of those fighters just randomly that I don't like. But the fight was sick. He's a fun fighter, I'll give him credit. And this fight with Anton Turkalj was fun. It was pretty back and forth. It wasn't crazy. Like, the first round wasn't anything to write home about. But it picked up. These guys started exchanging, ended in a pretty crazy knockout. Got fight of the night on the card that it took place on. So yeah, it deserves a mention on the list. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we had Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera. This was a one-sided ass whooping, but it was fun to watch, so I'm not going to put it too high up on the list just because of the fact that Chito had basically no success, so it's a limit. Like, Holloway Cater, incredible fight. The Holloway Cater's way better than this, but like, it's a similar sort of vibe of like, yeah, this dude's teeing off on him, but it's like, we're not really getting much else. Like, the excitement from the fight comes with, it's like, all back and forth, surviving this. It's like, the moment of like, craziness was like Cheeto eating the knee and like, oh, that's crazy, how do you eat that? But there was no like, oh, O'Malley's teeing off, oh, Cheeto fires back. Like, it was just all O'Malley. So the fight had a limited sort of ceiling on how good it ended up like being, but it was still very fun to watch. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we had Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker that took place on UFC 305. This was an absolutely crazy fight. The first two rounds of this, the third wasn't quite as amazing, but it was still good. But the first two rounds were crazy. The first round especially, Gamrot came out with aura, bro. Gamrot came out and took this dude down, started Khabib fucking prime 2017, 2018 Khabibing on this dude, just landing ground and pound. They're like, hang on, is he about to get this dude out of here in the first with the ground and pound? Like, what's going on with Gamrot? Like, who took Gamrot and fucking put him and got some aggression into this man? Like, what's going on? And then Hooker gets up and rocks him back, and bro, Gamrot rocked Hooker on the feet, Hooker rocked Gamrot on the feet. This fight was crazy. This fight was definitely one of the best fights of the year. Kind of a robbery but the fact that it ended up like being close enough to be a robbery shows that it was one of the closest fights of the year as well, where it was very competitive and not like an egregious decision like a Volkov-Garn style. But yeah, this fight was fun as hell. The first two rounds were nuts. Third round slowed down a bit, but was still very good. But yeah, incredible fight. Let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, Holloway versus Gaethje. This was still a crazy fight, but it's not top 5 in my opinion, and that might be where the casuals come to be like, how dare you, bro? This was the best fight of all time, man, because they fucking saw round 5 and immediately think the whole fight was like that. Holloway was just out striking him at range for like 3 rounds of this. He landed a few spinning back kicks, and apart from that, like, Holloway was just doing like, it was like the Arnold Allen fight. Like, it was good, it was fun. It wasn't the fucking Cater fight, it wasn't the Yair fight, it wasn't the Volk fight where it's like actually back and forth. Like, it was just range kickboxing with some spinning back kicks, which was good. It was a fun fight, but it wasn't like a barn burner. Gaethje was doing fucking nothing. Gaethje drops him in the 4th, that was fun, and then Holloway tees off on him and beats him up in the 5th before getting the KO in the end. Best like moment of the year, KO of the year, undoubtedly in a lot of people's minds. But I just don't think the whole fight as a whole deserves top 5 status for just basically round 5. Because I know it's like on paper, but like, if you take away round 5, that's just like let me think of an example. Like, what's a fight where someone won like 49-46 clearly, or 2-1 but got dropped towards the end of the fight? So it's like, oh, it was interesting. Like, if you take away the Gaethje knockdown and the flurry and the KO at the end, it was Holloway rocking him with a spinning back kick and then a flurry in the 5th. And apart from that, there was just the Gaethje drop, knockdown, and then the Holloway finish, which were the 2 highlights of the fight. I'm not trying to hate, but this, like, I normally would give it its credit, but just because I know people are going to come out and be like, bro, it's fight of the year, man. That's where I got to step in and be like, all right, chill. Go back and rewatch rounds 1 to 3. It was mid. Like, it was good, but it was mid. Anyway, let's move on, though, to the next fight. Next up, Brandon Royval versus Tatsuro Taira. This fight was awesome, but it was similar in the aspect of round 3 was one of the best rounds of the year, and apart from that, it wasn't that crazy. Like, it was round 1 and 5 were just Royval outstriking Taira on the feet, and rounds 2 and 4 was just Taira out-grappling and controlling Royval on the ground. that's simplified. Like, there were moments in between of fun, but like, it was the third round which made it what it was, where Royval was beating the fuck out of Tyra, almost had him finished, and then it goes for an armbar, and with like a minute to go, Tyra ends up on top and almost gets a rear naked choke. That was the highlight of the fight. If you take away round 3, this is just a competitive fight. But like, round 3 was awesome, so I gotta give it credit. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Start, we had Vinicius Oliveira versus Bernardo Sorpai. This fight was awesome, and it ended in one of the top 5 KOs of the year. But like, round 1 was mid, and round 3 was like, round 3 was cool. Round 2 was cool, but it was back and forth. It was like, Sorpai just had a lot of ground control, landing some ground and pound. Oliveira reverses him, ends up on top, beats him up. Round 3 was cool. He was just kind of shooting him up the whole time, just output, kick spamming, and then ends with the crazy KO. So I wanted to have it a bit higher. My initial like recall of this fight was it was like crazy. It was good, but it wasn't like, I thought it was like a barn burner the whole way through. It was a great fight, but it wasn't quite back and forth the whole time. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Poirier versus Saint-Denis. I'm putting it down the bottom. It was fun. It was back and forth for as long as it lasted. It just didn't last very long. So yeah, that's what this tier is for. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, Chris Curtis, Brendan Allen. This should be lower, but I just need space on this fucking tier list, to be honest with you. So this was a great fight though. It was great. It was back and forth. And it had moments of like, what the fuck? Because it had moments where Allen was on the back going for the choke. It had moments where Chris Curtis rocked Brendan Allen. Allen even rocked Chris Curtis at moments. Like, the 5th round was fun as. Maybe I need to go back and rewatch it. This was one of the I tried to avoid some of the 25-minute ones because I was just trying to speed through. This is why I didn't get the video out yesterday, because one, I had a party to go to because I had my Year 12 graduation. And the after party and all that shit. So then I got home at like 3 a.m. and just couldn't be fucked recording the video. So then the next day I just spent rewatching some fights, and then I was like, can't be fucked rewatching all of these, to be honest. So I wanted to get it out now. If I had rewatched every single fucking fight and had nothing else to do with my time, then I probably could have. But from my recall, this fight was pretty sick. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, Daniel Zellhuber versus Francisco Prado. This was like the Sheen/Temu version of Ribovics Zellhuber, but still a great fight. It's like, you get the fucking shitty AirPods. It's like, I mean, they're not AirPods, but they work fine. This was still a great fight. It's enjoyable. You can go back and rewatch it. It's just not quite the same quality as the Ribovics fight, but still, this was great. Less competitive, less back and forth. This was more like a close first, and then Zellhuber started picking them apart, but it was still fun. There was still output being thrown on both sides, so yeah, an enjoyable scrap nonetheless. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we got Davison Figueiredo versus Petr Yan. This was just back and forth. This was competitive. This was enjoyable to watch. It had moments of craziness, but there was no prolonged crazy fight. Like, round 1 was just like whatever. It was cool. I forget when the knockdowns happened, because there was a knockdown on both sides, and I think it picked up towards the back end of it from memory. I didn't go back and rewatch this one because it was relatively recent, so I was like, I can just go off the top of my head. But yeah, I do think this was a great fight. Just highly competitive, skillful, not like barn burner, but just a skilled matchup, which is enjoyable. Anyway, let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we had Matt Schnell versus Cody Durden. Another crazy round 1 and nothing past it, because it ended very soon after. But yeah, these two were just throwing leather for 5 minutes, and then Cody Durden subbed him and secured the double tap. Matt Schnell's done that twice. Tapping on both sides is crazy work. I can't lie. I wouldn't be tapping on both sides personally. But still, great scrap between the two of them. Let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, Gerard Cannonier versus Gael Boalio. This fight was awesome. I watched this on stream. I was rocking the Fighting Nerds glasses, which aren't even Fighting Nerds glasses. They're just my glasses from when I was in like grade 3, and I just put tape over them, which was fun. But we watched this on stream together. We were all heavily rooting for Boalio, and this was a fun watch. Look, maybe it should be lower down, but again, I'm just trying to evenly fill out this list, and also because if I had everything in like good scrap or like fun fight where most of them probably would end up being, I would just like distort the fucking size of the tier list. So anyway, yeah, this fight was sick though. Back and forth, crazy 3rd round from memory where he rocked Cannonier, and then the 5th round was crazy as well. Let's move on though to the next fight. Next up, we had another Petr Yan fight, and it was the Song Yadong fight. I thought this was better than the Figgy fight. The Figgy fight was like a bit higher level. There was like moments where Figgy looked better, but like Song won the first round, and you're like, hang on, is Petr Yan cooked? And then Yan came back, and this was the first time we saw Petr Yan back, and this was even odds going into this. So it's like, I don't think people were expecting it to be as competitive as it was. Or no, sorry, hang on. I think people were expecting him to be more competitive than it ended up being, I should say, because people were worried about Jan's future, and to watch him kind of prove that wrong and come back. And also, I thought this was just more back and forth in the Figgy fight. There were less moments of like prolonged grappling exchange where they didn't do much, or less kind of like feeling out process on the feet. They were just going for it more. 3 rounds helped Jan throw a bit more, make the fight a bit more fun, in my opinion, as well. Anyway, let's move on, though, to the next fight. DDP versus Sean Strickland. This was a good fight. It wasn't crazy. Like, bro, the fact that, like, until Holloway Gaethje, people had this as their fight of the year for, like, the first, like, 4 months. Kind of showed how, like, lacking we were in 2024, like the start of it, even though there were fights better than this. But yeah, it was a good fight, back and forth. They exchanged a bit. Like the first round had nothing. The second round was fun. The third and fourth were more fun, and fifth was pretty fun too at the end. But yeah, like this was just competitive, high level. Not crazy. Anyway, let's move on though to the last fight. To conclude, we had Bruno Silva versus Manel Cap. This was fun as hell. Cap styled on him. This was probably top 10 performances of the year, I would say. I could do that video as well. But in terms of the fight itself, it was very entertaining, but Bruno Silva didn't have a lot to do. He came out swinging in the third. Maybe I should have it higher. This objectively is a better fight than Strickland Dricus, but it just fits this category of one-sided, so that's why I put it in here. Anyway, guys, that'll do it. Hope you enjoyed. What fights did I miss? Some other mentions, I guess. Van versus Durden was fun as hell. Van versus Charles Johnson. Just glazing Josh Van at this point. You know, have you heard about guys, have you heard about Carlos Prates? No, but Swanson versus Philly was very fun as well. What else am I missing? There's probably a bunch that I'm missing. You guys let me know. But anyway, Gaziev, Rosenstrike, absolute barn burner. Makayev, Manel Cap, fight of the year contender. But yeah, that'll do it, guys. Drop some other video ideas you guys want to see. I'll try and keep the uploads daily, but no promises. We'll see what happens. But anyway, goodbye, and I'll see you guys in the next one.